What's up everyone, this is Cedric, also known as Skycedi, and I wanted to make this video to share what it's like being black and Korean. Now before I get into this video, I do want to say that everything that I mentioned in this video today is simply from my perspective and also my experiences. At the end of the day, I want this to just give you maybe a little bit more insight and just also get to know me a little bit better as well. So I want this video to shed a little bit more light on what it's like being mixed. At the end of the day, show you guys how awesome it is on having two different cultural backgrounds. Now let me give you guys a little bit of context here. My father was African American and he was born in Salisbury, North Carolina back in the mid-40s. Now, this was a time, especially in the South here in the States, where there was a lot of racial discrimination. This is before the Civil Rights Movement. So he grew up during this era where the blacks were with the blacks and then the whites were with the whites. And so this is where there was still a lot of that racial separation. So he grew up during this time as a kid. When he was in his late teens, he joined the military. So my dad ended up going to different countries. He was able to see the world and do something that a lot of people really didn't have the luxury or the ability to do. So my dad got the chance to experience different cultures, which is really cool. Now my mom, who is Korean, was born in Seoul in 1951. If you guys know a little bit of history, she was born during the time of the Korean War. So my mom grew up in Korea, in Seoul, Korea, during a time where there was a lot of tragedy, there was a lot of casualties, and Korea was at a very low point in history. And so she grew up in a time where she was very poor, she didn't have much growing up, she didn't get the education that a lot of people in other countries, especially in the States, had the luxury of getting. So a lot of people know Korea now as one of the fastest developing countries, a country leading in technology and entertainment, things like that. And you think of Korea and you think of nightlife, you think of lights and everything like that. But my mom grew up in a time where none of that existed. So she grew up in a very difficult time where Korea had to band together. Maybe I'll have my mom tell her story sometime in the future. I think that'd be really cool to hear her perspective. So let's fast forward to 1980. My mom and some of her family migrate over to the United States to start over, to start a new life. So my mom is in her early 30s. My father and my mom ended up meeting here in the States and they hit it off from the very beginning. And again, this is during a time where interracial marriages were not very common and it was oftentimes looked down upon. But my parents didn't care. My dad didn't discriminate, right? And my mom fell in love with my dad. They dated for 4 years before they got engaged and got married and had me. That's pretty much the story of how they met and how I came about. So in the early years of my life, my father was still in the military. We ended up being stationed in different places from Ohio to South Carolina to Portugal, which is right next to Spain. And I lived in all of those places up until age 5, where my dad was stationed at Pope Air Force Base, which is right outside of Fort Bragg in Fayetteville, North Carolina. And so that's where my dad retired, and that's pretty much where I grew up for most of my life. Now my early years were really cool. So my father was a type of dad who would go to work and he was very diligent in supplying for the family, but he was also the type of dad that would always want to be there with his kids. So whenever we had an event at school, like we had honor roll ceremony or we had like a taekwondo meet or something like that, he would always take time off of work to make sure he's there. And my dad was the guy with the big old camcorder, always recording everything. And so I have tons of videos that maybe I'll share at some point in the future. So that was the type of dad he was. So he was an awesome, incredible father. So my mom was a stay-at-home mom. My mom raised me and my sister. We went everywhere with her. If we weren't in school, we were always with my mom. So growing up, we had a lot of Korean influence in our lives. She would always cook Korean food for us. We would always watch Korean TV or Korean dramas or whatever she would watch on TV. And my mom always spoke Korean to me and my sister growing up. It was pretty cool because we had that Korean cultural experience. And for me growing up, that was normal. For me, that was life. That's how life was. And I didn't really think too much about, oh, I'm Korean and my friends are not Korean. I didn't really have that in my mind. I just knew that that was how my life was. And it was cool. Now my father, on the other hand, whenever he wasn't at work, he would always try to spend time with his kids as well. So we had a lot of influence from my dad. And one of my favorite memories of us growing up is whenever my dad would get in the kitchen cook. So my dad didn't cook often. My mom did most of the cooking in the house, but when my dad cooked, he went all out. We're talking southern food, we're talking collard greens, fried chicken, meatloaf, macaroni and cheese, roast beef, we're talking pinto beans, black-eyed peas. He went all out. So my dad introduced that southern African-American type of culture to us as well. So it was really cool to get different types of flavors, different types of foods growing up. It wasn't until around middle school or maybe late elementary school where I began to realize the differences between cultures. I remember I had a really close friend and he was Panamanian, and I remember his family would do things differently. They would speak Spanish, they would cook different types of cuisines, and so it was always cool to go to his house because I noticed that they would do things differently. And that's when I started to really realize that there are differences in cultures. Now in my middle school days, that's when things started to get really interesting. I grew up in a town where there were a lot of African Americans, there were a lot of Caucasians, there were a good handful of Hispanics, and there was a little population of Koreans and maybe other Asians. And so I was used to seeing different races of people. I was used to having different types of friends. I had black friends, white friends, Hispanic friends. I had all types of friends. But in middle school, that's when I began to really realize that there were differences in races, and that's when I began to experience some of the negative sides of being different, from identity issues, from people pointing that fact out and treating me like I was a little different. And so that's where some of my struggle started to come in. I remember I was part of a recreation football league. Our team was full of primarily black kids and white kids, and there were a couple of Hispanic kids as well, and I was the only mixed kid. I remember my coach, this white guy, gave me the nickname Black Chinaman. He used to always call me Black Chinaman. And I remember some of the other football team members would call me that too. Now, looking back, I realized that it was more so in a derogatory type of way that he was using that, but I didn't really know how to take that. My football team members would always be like, hey yo, what's up, Black Chinaman? And they would make fun of me. And at that point, that's when I started to realize that maybe me being different is not a good thing. So during this time, I really began to struggle with my identity because I wanted to fit in. I had a lot of friends who were quote unquote black friends, and me being the Asian one out the bunch, I wanted to fit in, and I would begin to talk a certain way, I would begin to dress a certain way, and I would just try to fit in with these people, but I felt really weird. I always felt really awkward, and so I started to wrestle with this identity issue. So yeah, it was difficult because I would go to school and act one way, and I would dress one way. I would come home and be another way. It was just a funny time. It was a very funny time, and so I was just trying to find my way in being who I was and trying to figure out how to fit in. So I've got a couple of years under my belt of really wrestling with some of these identity issues. Am I black? Am I Korean? And then once I went to high school, now people were making fun of me because I was acting too white, whatever that even means. And so I wasn't black enough, I wasn't Korean enough, now I'm acting white, and so I'm all sorts of confused. So during this time in high school, I really started getting into Korean popular culture. I used to have a little portable CD player, and it would be like the anti-shock, anti-skip version, so I could like have it in my pocket and walk while the CD player was actually going. I would carry this on the bus with me on the way to school, and I would have little burned CDs of Soteji, Baby Boksu, Finko, H.O.T, Yusungjun, Jinushan, like all of my favorite Korean artists back in the 90s, and I would listen to this because this was like my favorite type of music. It was just a very interesting time because I had so many different types of influences, and back in the day, I didn't know what to do with that. And I didn't know how to interpret all of that. Now looking back, I think that's great that I was exposed to so many different facets of culture. So let's fast forward to about 5 years ago. I moved from North Carolina to New Jersey, Palisades Park, New Jersey, which is New Jersey's K-Town. And it's a pretty homogenous town. Even though it's not 100% Korean, it's mostly Korean. Korean stores, Korean people, you go outside, it's just all Korean people. And it's funny because I come from a place where there's a lot of different mixed people because of the military, to a place here where they're not really used to seeing different people who are mixed. And so this is a pretty interesting experience the last couple of years here as well. All right, so hopefully that gave you guys a little bit of context on how I grew up and a little bit of some of the things that I've went through. I left a lot of details out, but that's okay. I'm sure I'll have an opportunity to cover some of those things, maybe in some future videos. So what are some of the challenges that I face being Black and Korean, specifically here in America? So some of the things that I've noticed is a lot of times people tend to put your identity in a box. What I mean by that is you have to choose a side. You have to either be Black or Korean. You have to either speak Black and dress Black, or you have to speak Korean and be Korean. And it's really tough for a lot of people to just accept the fact that you are both. Just because you're 50% Black, 50% Korean doesn't mean that you can only understand or partake of the culture 50%. Sometimes people will say, but you're only half Korean, you're only half Black, as if you can't relate to a certain issue or certain topic because you're not full-blooded. For the most part, these challenges are very minor. I haven't had to deal with anything that I would consider to be a major challenge or a major hurdle for me to overcome. Sometimes I do feel like I am judged based on how I look because I don't look Korean enough. A lot of times, certain Korean people would treat me like I don't understand Korean culture or the nuances of the culture. Another challenge I face a lot of times, this can come from both sides, from the Black side, from the Korean side, but really in more recent times I've dealt with it more from the Korean side because I happen to be around a lot of Korean people. I have to deal with ignorant comments, and comments that are to me pretty ignorant, but to them they don't mean any harm by it. It's just because they don't know any better. I would have to deal with those comments of, but you're only half Korean, like how would you understand that? A lot of times people will say things, they don't mean to come across borderline racist, but people will say stuff that is really out of ignorance because maybe they don't know any better. So as far as challenges that I've had to deal with being Black and Korean, I would say a majority of the challenges are really identity related. So they're personal challenges, internal challenges that I've had to deal with, and I deal with from time to time even now. I can say that I haven't really dealt with any challenge that I would consider to be monumental or a huge hurdle for me to jump over or overcome, fortunately. Now, when I move to Korea in a couple of months, that might change. So that's gonna be for another video. Now, as far as the positive sides and the great sides of being Black and Korean, you get the best of both worlds. You get to experience two different cultures that are vastly different, and you get to see the convergence of those two cultures into one. And there's nothing like it. I think it's a beautiful thing when two different people from two different worlds can come together and create their own world. And the great thing is, with the convergence of those two worlds, it doesn't sacrifice each respective culture, because each culture can come and create a world together that can dwell harmoniously. I get to experience different language, I get to experience the history of both cultures, I get to experience the different foods, and there's just so much value in that I think a lot of people who are mixed can experience. And also another thing is, I think that in today's society especially, being mixed is something that's seen as unique for the most part. Now, it does still have its challenges, especially in certain contexts, in certain locations or certain parts of the world, but overall in my experience, people find me to be unique and different in a good way. So being Black and Korean, I get a lot of comments and I get a lot of questions that I hear over and over. Questions like, what are you? Do you speak Korean? Are you into Korean girls or Black girls? Which side do you relate to more? The Black side or the Korean side? You don't really look Korean, you look exotic. Are you Filipino? Yo, you have that good hair. Yo, your hair be nappy. Oh, you like spicy food? Are you sure you can handle it? Where's Korea? Is that like in China? What, you can't play basketball? Alright guys, that's it. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you learned a little bit about what it's like being Black and Korean, at least from my perspective. And I do want to end the video by saying that I personally have tremendous pride for both sides. I'm extremely proud to be African American, but also extremely proud to be Korean. Now, before I end the video, I just want to say that no matter if you're Black and Korean, or if you're just Black or Korean or white or Hispanic or Asian or anything for that matter, that you are unique and we're all special in our own way. Alright guys, that's it from me today. If If you like this video, do me a favor and hit that like button, and also feel free to share this with all of your friends. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, I want to invite you to do that as well. Just hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. That way you can get alerts every time I upload a new video. I've got more content coming for you guys, and yeah, let's just kick it together. Let's have fun. I'll see you guys in the next video, and remember to always seize the day. Peace.